In this video, we're going to talk about experimental design. When designing an experiment, you do need to follow a series of steps in order for it to be a sound experiment and usually a repeatable experiment with a valid conclusion. In the first step of your experiment, you're going to be making some observations. For example, let's say you go to an apple orchard and you compare it to another neighboring apple orchard. And you notice that the neighboring apple orchard has more apples than the first one. And then so with your observations, you start to think about some questions. What would cause those apple trees to have more apples? From there, you would then make a prediction. A prediction is an if and then statement. Many times in high school, you are taught that an if then or an if then and because statement is your hypothesis. This is actually not correct. This is your prediction. Now, when you go to write your hypothesis, you do need a few variables that you need to incorporate into your hypothesis. The variables are your independent and dependent. You can also include your control into your hypothesis. Your independent variable is always going to be compared to your control, and that is the thing that you change in your experiment. For example, let's say in the apple orchard, the neighboring apple orchard waters their trees with sugar water, whereas the one that you originally visited only waters theirs with regular water. Your independent variable would be the sugar water. You can't just say that it's water. That's too broad. You do have to be very specific. Your dependent variable, now this is how you know that the independent variable had an impact in your experiment. So a dependent variable is something that is measured or counted or observed. Your control or your control group is something that does not change in your experiment and again has to be compared to your independent variable. For this example, it would be regular water because you are directly comparing it to the sugar water. Other factors such as the same species of apple tree, the same amount of time that the experiment goes on. These things are called control variables. It's not your control group, but these are your control variables, and that is not the same thing. The last thing that you have in your experimental design would be replicates. Replicates are just the number of trials that you do that replicate your original experiment. So let's say you have 100 trees. 50 of them were with regular water and 50 were with sugar water. Your number of replicates is actually 50 minus 1 or 49. Why is it not 100? Now, the reason for that is you're comparing tree to tree, right? A one-to-one comparison. So if you have 50 of your trees that are grown with water and 50 of your sugar-grown trees, that first tree compared to the first sugar tree, that would be experiment number 1. And then you replicate that 49 more times. I hope this helps.